We continue our coverage of the killing of Trayvon Martin, the trial of George Zimmerman. Edward Wyckoff Williams, contributing editor for TheRoot.com, has secured the one of the only interviews with the family of the slain teenager, and Edward is with us today to share what he learned from this interview. You interviewed Trayvon's father,
yes,
as well as the family attorney, Benjamin Crump. And so
yes,
I'm sure you learned some really interesting things. And let's start here, Edward, because particularly recently, the defense has released so much information that can be construed as defamatory,
yes,
to Trayvon as a teenager. What did you learn about this young man and the type of boy he is?
Well, that's exactly where I started the conversation with his father, Debbie. And the father basically said that he wanted Americans to know that his kid was a good kid and that he thought his child was perfect. I thought that that was such a wonderful way for a father to speak about a son, particularly an African-American father, speaking about an African-American child. And so a part of, I think, what you are referencing, this defamatory nature that's coming out of Mark O'Mara's defense team for Zimmerman, is to try to frame this kid as somehow a thug, as if he were the aggressor in this situation. And one of the things that I asked the father is, would you give your son any advice differently, or would you advise African-American fathers differently now, in light of the fact that you now see the dangers of when African-American boys are targeted as suspicious and seen as criminals, even though they're just simple kids going to get Skittles and an iced tea? And the father said, you know, I don't have any advice. He said, all I can say is that you can't prepare your child for the warped mentality of others. He said that all you could do is teach your kid to be a good kid and to abide by the laws of the land. He said, but the facts of this case show that George Zimmerman acted with a deranged mind and that he just prays and hopes that justice will be done.
And I'm sure that the media attention has taken its toll, not just in the last couple of weeks, but this has been going on for the last year or so. Did you talk to him about that? What did he say about what it's like to have to grieve his son in the public eye?
He didn't really address that. I think that he's now gotten to a point where he accepts that this is a part of his life story. But one of the things that I thought was really profound that he said to me was that the hole that has been created is so much deeper and darker than people realize. He said specifically that George Zimmerman didn't just take his son, but that he had cut off an entire branch of his family tree. He said that he had looked forward to the day of having grandkids through Trayvon, and that's something that can never happen. And so I think that when we look at this and we talk about gun violence in this country and we see children dying at such alarming rates, I think people need to understand that pain goes on for decades and decades. It never leaves.
And I'm sure the release of all of this information, that you know, the text messages and the videos, has to be particularly painful for the family.
Yes, and he addressed that. One specific thing that I wanted to talk to him about was the question of whether or not Trayvon possibly had smoked marijuana, because I think that the defense team is trying to use old racial codes in this country. The idea that a black boy is somehow connected to drugs or a drug dealer and somehow then deserves to be put upon by authorities, that's definitely been a part of Mark O'Mara's strategy. And the father addressed that by saying, first of all, it's completely irrelevant. And then the father, which I thought was really brilliant, cited a report from the National Institutes of Health that showed that 36% of high school seniors have smoked marijuana before they graduate, and that the majority of those kids are white. And the father said, would George Zimmerman have attacked a white child in that neighborhood and just assumed that the child had smoked marijuana? Because he could have, but he didn't, which showed that race was still a central factor in this. And then I talked to the attorney who addressed that point, which I thought was really interesting. And he said that the reason why Mark O'Mara has pursued this strategy of focusing so much on whether or not the child had potentially smoked marijuana in the past is that he doesn't want to address the fact that George Zimmerman had temazepam and Adderall in his system on the night that he killed Trayvon. These are prescription drugs, and the side effects are aggressive behavior, insomnia, and hallucinations. And so this is all going to come out in the trial, and it's something that I think when you're looking at a case where you have a 29-year-old man with a criminal background who's been cited for domestic violence, who has been arrested for aggressively resisting arrests against a police officer, and then this man stalks and taunts a child in the dark, and that child ends up dead. These are the real facts. These are the things that need to be addressed, not the dalliances of a teenage boy with Skittles in his hand.
Yeah, now, in your conversation with Benjamin Crump, the family attorney, what did you learn about his optimism about the case that the prosecution is bringing against George Zimmerman?
Well, we specifically talked about the stand your ground law, and this was a really key thing because I asked specifically why the Zimmerman people or the Zimmerman team had chosen to forego the stand your ground pretrial hearing. And the attorney Crump said specifically they want a case on self-defense because under self-defense you don't have to stand trial. And he knows that if Zimmerman takes the stand and is cross-examined, he's not going to stand up because there are too many inconsistencies in his story and too many mendacious lies that have been said over the time that have been passed out over the press that won't stand up in court. And that dichotomy, I think, is creating a scenario where Benjamin Crump is feeling extremely positive, extremely optimistic that they're going to get justice here.
I'm just curious about this, Edward. There's been a lot of talk. In fact, Joey Jackson, our criminal defense consultant that was on the show earlier, talked a little bit about the veracity of bringing the second-degree murder charge against George Zimmerman. Did you talk about that with Benjamin Crump and whether or not that was the right charge and the right decision?
Yes, Benjamin Crump, I didn't speak to him about this week. I actually spoke to him when I spoke to the mother about a month ago. And Ben Crump basically said that this is, for all intents and purposes, a first-degree murder trial. The fact that Zimmerman got out of the car after being told not to and pursued the child shows that he had intent. The problem with, I think, the prosecution's choice of a second-degree murder charge is that they thought that that's the best one that they could win. And so that's a strategic effort, I think, less than an actual this is a second-degree versus a first-degree murder trial or a manslaughter charge.
Indeed, indeed. I know that you also talked to Trayvon Martin about the trial. It starts today.
Yes.
And I was a little surprised about what you told me off camera about whether or not he's anxious about the beginning of this trial. How does he feel about it?
Well, it seems like Trayvon Martin has accepted the fact that this is a part of his life story and that his son represents something bigger than himself. And so I think he's accepted that burden and that responsibility. The mother is still extremely emotional, as you can imagine any mother would be. But I think particularly a black mother living in a society that almost devalues the lives of young black males, that this was her baby. And that's literally what she said to me. She said, anyone who met my child could see that he was a skinny teenage boy. She said he was not a man. So this idea that he was somehow an equal threat to George Zimmerman is ludicrous. And I think that you then have two sides of the way they're approaching this trial. The mother is still extremely anxious, whereas the father seems more resigned.
Indeed. And just in one word or two, what was the tone of the interview? What was the prevailing emotion?
I think the prevailing emotion is that this is a man who loved his son, and he wants the world to know how special he was.
All right. Edward Wyckoff Williams, thank you very much for sharing
that
with us. And we'll look forward to your article when it comes out.
Excellent.
Take care. And thank you for joining us on this Monday on Arise America. We hope you'll be right back here with us tomorrow. We will have continuing coverage of the Trayvon Martin trial and all the updates of the news of the day. Have a great day.